It's the ultimate game, isn't it? To lead someone down a glittering path, only to pull the rug from under their feet. But the trouble with illusions is that they are only as strong as the belief of their victim. And when you stop believing, when you refuse to play the fool, those illusions shatter like fragile glass, leaving their creators scrambling in the shards. There's an art to seeing reality when all around you screams to look away. It requires more than just sight. It demands clarity, a ruthless willingness to strip away the comforting lies and face the raw, ugly core of the situation. While others are content to linger in the safety of shadows, you walk into the blinding light. You see the cracks in the walls they've painted perfect, the rot beneath the gilded surface. What they called truth was a mirage, and while they prided themselves on their cleverness, you simply smiled and stepped around their trap. An illusion isn't just a lie. It's a masterpiece of control. It tells you where to look, what to feel, how to think. It gives power to the weak and safety to the frightened. But control is a double-edged blade, and once you see through their tricks, their power crumbles. The moment you understand the strings they pull, the puppeteer becomes irrelevant. They lose their audience. And what is a magician without an enthralled crowd? Reality, for all its harshness, is freedom. It is untamed, unyielding, and unapologetic. It strips you of comfort, but arms you with strength. The illusion was soft, enticing, designed to cradle you in complacency. Reality slapped you awake, pushed you into a fire you never wanted, but one that forged you into something they could never have anticipated. They were playing a game of make-believe. You were learning how to win in a world where only the sharpest survive. Some people fear seeing what's real because it demands something from them. Responsibility, action, a choice. It's easier to stay asleep, wrapped in the lies someone else tells you. But you saw their illusion for what it was, a desperate attempt to control, to distract, to conceal their weakness. You didn't just see through it, you burned it to the ground. And now, standing in the ashes of their deceit, the reality is yours to mold. The illusion had one fatal flaw. It underestimated the mind it was meant to deceive. You didn't just follow the narrative they crafted. You questioned the storyteller. You rewrote their script. While they were busy weaving falsehoods, you were learning their patterns, dismantling their structure. They were so focused on maintaining their facade, they failed to notice the mirror you held up, reflecting every crack, every inconsistency. Seeing the reality doesn't mean you fight on their terms. Why would you? Fighting illusions with brute force is like punching smoke. No, you play smarter. You become the shadow that watches, the presence that cannot be fooled. And when the moment comes, you turn their illusion against them. The trap they set becomes their prison. The reality they tried to hide becomes their downfall. The most dangerous weapon against an illusionist is someone who refuses to be enchanted. You didn't need magic to win. You needed clarity. You didn't need their approval to rise. You needed their lies to collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. And they gave you that gift, unknowingly, through every thread of deceit they spun. People who craft traps often believe themselves immune to their own devices. They think their schemes are artful, their strings invisible, their plots untouchable. But the universe has a way of laughing at such arrogance. Traps are not simple creations. They carry the intent of their maker, an echo of malice that lingers in the air. That energy, toxic and sharp, circles back like a predator finding its wounded prey. Those who engineer destruction rarely foresee that they themselves are part of the grand equation, that the trap's first victim is always its architect. A trap is never flawless. It carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. Every cunning snare relies on assumptions, on human error, on someone stepping predictably into its jaws. But what happens when the prey sees the setup? When the victim steps aside, leaving the creator to stumble into their own design? The humiliation isn't just poetic, it's inevitable. The snare doesn't close on the one it was meant for. It snaps back with the force of all the ill will used to construct it. The hunter becomes the hunted, not by chance, but by the weight of their intent. Intent matters. It's what fuels the universe, what shapes outcomes, what determines the course of unseen events. Those who act with cruelty plant seeds in the soil of their own lives. And as those seeds grow, they become strangling vines, choking the very hands that sowed them. The universe doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive, not in the way they imagine. It simply balances the scales. If you dig a pit, you had better ensure you're not standing at the edge when the ground shifts beneath you. To plot against another is to invite chaos into your life. Every step in deception is like walking on thin ice, beautiful on the surface, but treacherous below. The ice cracks slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. Then comes the moment when it gives way entirely, plunging the schemer into the icy void of their own creation. And as they fall, gasping for air, there is no one to blame but themselves. Their trap was their masterpiece, and its collapse is their final lesson. Control is an illusion, and those who believe they hold it tightly are often the ones most out of control. The need to manipulate, to deceive, to ensnare is born from fear. Fear of losing, of being powerless, of facing the harsh mirror of reality. But fear blinds the schemer. It leads them into overconfidence, into underestimating the one they aim to destroy. And in that blindness, they miss the subtle shift, the moment when their plan unravels. By the time they realize, the walls are already closing in. The universe is neither kind nor cruel. It simply reflects. Every act carries an equal and opposite consequence, not as punishment, but as a reminder. If you build a life on deceit, betrayal, and malice, those are the bricks that will fall on you when the foundation cracks. The trap is a mirror, a reflection of the darkness within, and its collapse is the light forcing its way in. The schemer's undoing is not an act of vengeance. It's a law of nature. What is most ironic is that those who create traps often think themselves above consequence. They view others as pawns, their plans as infallible. But the higher their pedestal, the further they have to fall. And fall, they do. Not all at once, but in agonizing increments, as each piece of their scheme crumbles beneath them. And as they lay in the wreckage of their own making, the realization dawns too late. The game was rigged, not against their target, but against them. You understood this. You didn't fight their trap head on. You sidestepped it. You let it consume itself, watched as its creator was caught in the snare meant for you. The moment they believed they had you, the universe was already turning the wheel, already writing their downfall. And now, as you stand untouched, they drown in the chaos they unleashed. Masks are fragile things. They can gleam with the illusion of perfection, radiate charm, and convince even the keenest of eyes. for a while. But the weight of pretense is a heavy burden, and time has a way of eroding falsehood. The cracks begin subtly, small imperfections in an otherwise flawless facade. A stumble in the act, a slip of the tongue, or a moment of unguarded honesty. These are the precursors. And once the cracks appear, they only widen, revealing the rotting foundation beneath. The mask falls not with a crash, but with a whisper, peeling away layer by layer, until the truth stands exposed in all its raw and unbecoming glory. People wear masks to survive, to manipulate, to pretend. They believe their layers of deception will shield them from scrutiny. But in their arrogance, they forget one simple fact. No mask is indestructible. It warps under the strain of its own lies, suffocates the wearer with its weight, and eventually collapses. When the mask falls, it's not the dramatic unveiling they feared. It's a quiet, unceremonious disintegration. And in that moment, their carefully constructed illusion dies, leaving only their bare, vulnerable self for the world to see. The most interesting thing about masks is how much effort people put into maintaining them. They convince themselves that the performance is convincing, that no one can see past the facade. But the mask doesn't hide them. It amplifies their flaws. Every insincere smile, every calculated gesture, every rehearsed word is another thread unraveling the illusion. The harder they cling to the mask, the more obvious it becomes. What they fear most is not being seen for who they are. It's being seen for who they are pretending to be. There's a beauty in the inevitability of the mask's fall. It's poetic justice, the universe's way of evening the scales. The mask protects the wearer for a time, but it also isolates them. To wear a mask is to live in fear. Fear of exposure, fear of rejection, fear of failure. And fear is corrosive. It eats away at the edges of the illusion, leaving it frayed and brittle. The mask becomes a prison, and the wearer its prisoner, trapped by their own need to deceive. The fall of the mask is not a sudden event. It's a slow, agonizing process. The lies that held it in place begin to crumble. The stories that supported it start to contradict themselves. And with every slip, every mistake, the mask becomes less convincing. The fall is inevitable, but it's also a spectacle. A moment of reckoning that strips away the pretense and forces the wearer to confront their own reflection. The mask was never the lie. The lie was always the person behind it. There's a certain satisfaction in watching the mask fall. It's a moment of clarity, of vindication, of triumph. The wearer who believed themselves untouchable is suddenly vulnerable, exposed, undone. Their carefully curated persona dissolves, leaving only the raw, unfiltered reality. And in that moment, the power shifts. The one who sees through the mask holds the upper hand, while the wearer is left scrambling to salvage what little dignity that they have left. People fear the fall of the mask because it represents loss of control, of power, of identity. But what they fail to realize is that the mask was never their salvation. It was their curse. The longer they wore it, the more they lost themselves. And when it falls, it's not just the illusion that shatters. It's the person they pretended to be. The fall is not just an end. It's a beginning, a chance to start anew, to rebuild, to reclaim what was lost. The mask is a lie, but it's also a lesson. It teaches the wearer about the cost of deception, about the weight of pretense, about the power of authenticity. When the mask falls, it reveals not just the truth about the wearer, but also the truth about the world they tried to deceive. The illusion dies, but in its death, it brings clarity, understanding, and perhaps a chance for redemption. You watch the masks fall, one by one, and you saw through the illusions they worked so hard to maintain. You didn't need to fight them, to expose them, to tear them apart. You simply waited, knowing that time would do the work for you. And as the masks crumbled, you stood unshaken, watching as the reality they tried so hard to hide came to light. Because in the end, illusions are fragile, and reality always finds a way to break through. Liars are architects of their own fictional kingdoms, lavishly decorated with falsehoods and facades. They live in a self-constructed dreamscape where every deceitful brick is another barrier against the unforgiving winds of reality. To them, the truth is a predator lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to pounce. And so, they scramble, adding layer upon layer of lies, hoping their house of cards will withstand the storm. But reality isn't a force to be tamed. It's a relentless tide that erodes even the most intricate of lies, leaving their so-called kingdom in ruins. The most insidious trait of a liar isn't the lies themselves. It's their ability to turn their illusions into weapons. They prey on the trust of others, exploiting it to keep their charade alive. Every person they entangle becomes another thread in the tapestry of their deception, and every act of kindness extended to them is turned into a tool of manipulation. Liars don't just resist reality. They despise it because it reminds them of their own inadequacy. They loathe the fact that their carefully curated world will never measure up to the raw, unfiltered nature of what's real. The game liars play is exhausting, even for them. To maintain their facade, they must constantly shift their stories, recalibrate their schemes, and silence the voices of dissent that creep into their minds at night. They convince themselves that their lies are their salvation, their shield against a world they fear will reject them. But the irony is that with every falsehood, they carve away at their own humanity, becoming nothing more than hollow shells wrapped in pretension. And when the cracks begin to show, those around them don't see a person. They see the emptiness inside. The resistance to reality is not just an act of cowardice. It's a declaration of war against the very fabric of existence. To lie is to spit in the face of the universe, to deny the inevitability of truth. But reality has a way of fighting back. It doesn't strike with anger or malice. It simply waits. A lie may thrive for a season, but the passage of time is a brutal equalizer. No matter how clever the liar, no matter how elaborate the web, the truth always finds a way to surface, shattering their illusions with quiet but devastating precision. Liars are gamblers, wagering everything on the hope that their facade will outlast the patience of those they deceive. They count on their victims to give up, to walk away, to accept the illusion as reality. But there's a fatal flaw in this strategy. Not everyone is willing to turn a blind eye. Some people see the lies for what they are and stand resolute, refusing to be pawns in the liar's game. And in the end, it's not the lies that destroy the liar. It's the unyielding strength of those who see through them. Every lie is a betrayal, not just of others, but of oneself. To lie is to admit that you're not enough, that your reality is so unbearable that it must be altered to gain acceptance. Liars don't just deceive the world, they deceive themselves. And while the world may be fooled for a time, the self cannot be so easily tricked. Every lie leaves a scar, a reminder of the chasm between who they are and who they pretend to be. And no amount of deception can fill that void. The downfall of a liar is never a grand spectacle. It's a slow, agonizing unraveling. The world they built begins to crumble piece by piece, each lie collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. The people they once controlled start to see the patterns, the inconsistencies, the cracks in the facade. And when the lies are stripped away, what remains is a raw, unfiltered truth that the liar can no longer run from. It's not just their illusion that dies. It's their power, their influence, their ability to deceive. What liars fail to understand is that reality doesn't need to fight them. It simply waits for them to exhaust themselves. The act of lying is a constant battle against the inevitable, a war that cannot be won. Reality doesn't need to force its way into their lives. It simply exists, unyielding and unchanging. And while liars may resist, they cannot escape the consequences of their actions. Every lie told is another step toward their own undoing, another thread in the web that will eventually ensnare them. For those who live in truth, the downfall of a liar is not an act of vengeance. It's a moment of clarity. It's the realization that no illusion can outlast the perseverance of reality. Those who have been wronged by lies don't need to seek revenge or retribution. They simply need to stand firm and let reality do its work. And when the liar's facade crumbles, it's not just their lies that are exposed. It's their deepest fears, their insecurities, their inability to face the world as it is. Delusion is the deadliest toxin, seeping into the mind and masquerading as wisdom. To believe that one's perspective is the sole lens through which reality can be understood is to close the door on growth, on enlightenment, on redemption. It is a form of arrogance that doesn't need validation. It feeds on its own stubbornness. Those trapped within their delusions are not merely blind. They actively choose not to see. They construct a fortress of falsehoods, and within its walls, they feel safe, invincible. But the fortress is brittle, its foundation weak. Reality doesn't need to batter it down. It simply waits for the weight of self-deception to collapse the structure from within. The danger of singular perspectives lies in their limitations. A narrow view of reality breeds insecurity, the kind that lashes out at anything or anyone that doesn't conform. Such people spend their lives sharpening the blades of their opinions, ready to cut down dissent. But what they fail to realize is that their weapons turn inward as well. To deny the existence of other realities is to deny oneself the opportunity to evolve. It is to trap oneself in a cycle of stagnation, circling endlessly in the shallow waters of self-righteousness, never daring to dive deeper. Delusion thrives on isolation. It feeds on echo chambers, where every voice sounds the same, every thought reinforces the other. Those who cling to their illusions surround themselves with mirrors, reflecting only what they want to see. But mirrors crack under pressure, and the image they worship will eventually distort. The moment of realization, when the reflection no longer matches the fantasy, is the cruelest form of reckoning. It is a descent into chaos, the shattering of a world built on lies. And for those who have invested their entire being in this illusion, the fall is catastrophic. Reality is not a single thread, but a tapestry woven from countless perspectives. To claim dominion over it is an act of supreme folly, a refusal to acknowledge the complexity of existence. Those who insist on their version of reality often find themselves at war with the world, battling forces they cannot understand, let alone control. Their delusions act as blindfolds, and in their darkness, they stumble, lash out, and ultimately destroy the very things they seek to protect. It's not reality that betrays them. It's their inability to accept its multifaceted nature. Those who cling to a single perception of reality are prisoners of their own making. They walk a tightrope stretched over a chasm of their fears, convinced that any deviation from their beliefs will lead to a fall. But the rope frays with time, and their balance wavers. The inevitable plunge into the abyss is not the world's doing, but their own. They chose the rope, the height, the risk. And when the fall comes, it's not an accident. It's the result of their unwillingness to look beyond their narrow path. Belief is a powerful force, capable of shaping destinies and destroying lives. To believe that one's view is the only view is to wield belief like a weapon, swinging it recklessly and indiscriminately. It cuts through reason, through compassion, through connection. It isolates the wielder, leaving them alone on a battlefield of their own creation.